All right, are we ready? I think we've figured that out. So thank you for being patient with the changes that happen. That master schedule has a lot of people who have access, and I think somehow there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and we unintentionally delete things. So anyway, you're here, and tonight's session is all about interactive assessments. We're going to look specifically at 3 different tools, but we're going to talk more generally about assessments and assessments in an online space and some of the other types of tools as well that are out there besides these 3. So the idea is that you start to think about how to use technology for assessment with students, and you'll get a little bit more proficient in these tools and in thinking about these tools from the teacher lens. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the next slide. Again, this is my contact information. I know several of you have probably participated in some of my previous sessions. And if for some reason you haven't met me before, I am Dr. Cassandra Kelly. I'm located in San Diego, and I was previously a teacher in grades 3 through 5, and then I was a school technology coordinator, so helping a lot of the other teachers with technology support. And I got into higher education and teaching soon-to-be teachers like yourselves, all about how to use technology and lesson planning and instruction. And that's where I am now, here as a faculty in the Cal State Teach program. And I also work for National University. So I work with so many student teachers across the state. And I know we're all in this crazy situation with learning online. Some schools are actually practicing online teaching, and others are still not quite there yet. So you're in a great place to learn a little bit more about some of the tools and strategies so that when the fall starts, you can maybe, help get this up and running. So our agenda for this evening, we're going to begin with just a review of what are the different forms of assessment, what can that look like. We'll talk a little bit about that in a traditional classroom setting, and then we're going to switch gears to the online spaces, looking at the difference between synchronous and asynchronous teaching with assessments, talking a really big focus on differentiating instruction, because that's one of the beauties of some of these technology tools, is that we can really change our instruction and align it with our students' needs and assets. You'll probably hear that terminology a lot, needs and assets. That terminology came from the Cal TPA, which is an assessment that you'll take in terms 2 and 3. Some of you have already taken it, or you're in the process of finishing it. And so this actually will be hopefully helpful as you begin thinking about that. You might hear my cat in the background. Is that why you're laughing? Yeah, it's every time I decide to be online that he gets very vocal. So he'll be actively participating. And then the last piece is we're going to dive into these tools. So we're going to look a little bit more closely again at SeeSaw, FlipGrid, and Padlet, but there's a ton of other ones. And so we'll talk about that. And then at the end, usually is a good time for more individual Q&A, things that you want to know that might not apply to the group, or maybe they do. But I also encourage you, if you have questions throughout the presentation, to just jump in. You can use your microphone. It's really challenging for me because I'm projecting the presentation on the screen to keep up with the chat. I can see the chat right now, but sometimes it's just too many screens to toggle between. So if I miss something, just let me know, jump in on the mic, and I'm happy to answer questions. So we'll begin with a discussion about what is assessment. And I picked this visual because what I like about it is, first of all, it shows you assessment is a cycle, right? When we're teaching, we are constantly thinking about assessing the students when we're communicating new information. We're thinking about what their prior knowledge is. We're looking to see if what we've shared in the learning process, if they've actually gathered some of that information and they've made some connections with their prior knowledge. We're looking to see what they can do with that information. So if they can create something new, if they can answer something about it, if they can apply that knowledge. And then once we go through that process, it's really important that we're providing feedback along the way. So This is an opportunity for that on the spot or on the fly teaching, where the way that students respond can give us some guidance as to how we should continue the lesson and what we should be doing. And then, it just kind of continues all throughout that lesson and all throughout any unit of instruction. And so it's a continuum. Again, we want to think ahead about what our goals are for the teaching, for the lesson or the unit. So we want to think about where the learner should be going, where the learner is during that lesson, and where the learner needs to be and how they're going to get there. So there's different ways that we will assess them. First of all, we want to think about formative and summative assessment. So formative, we tend to think of as at the beginning of the lesson, when we're really starting to learn about the unit or the information in the unit, and summative at the conclusion. And I have a slide that will go over those a little bit in more detail. The other piece is that there are informal levels of assessment and there are formal pieces. So informal is typically throughout the entire lesson, and formal we tend to think of as segments towards the end of a lesson or towards the end of a unit, where we really want to have the students maybe producing something or answering specific questions. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then self-assessment is another important piece, because that's where it's not only the teacher who's evaluating the learning, but it's the student who's looking at where they are and what their confidence level is as they are participating in the activity. And it's important for the teacher to determine if that aligns with what the performance is. So the student might be very confident, but their work might not be showing that they're doing, the right thing. Or the opposite could happen, where the student feels like they're really struggling and they don't feel secure, but yet they're really excelling. And so as a teacher, we need to take that information so that we can support them and we can make them feel confident, make them feel good about what they're doing. And, that's important. So those are the different forms. So building onto this whole formative versus summative, I like this analogy on the bottom about when you're cooking. So formative is like when the chef tastes the noodles. So it's at the very, usually the beginning parts of the lesson. It can happen during the learning activity. And the goal is that we're trying to monitor what's happening with the students and giving them feedback. And it might be frequent throughout the instruction. But the summative is actually when we're giving those noodles to the guests, right? Like if we were in the restaurant and we're finally taking them out and letting other people see them and experience them. So that's, where we're actually evaluating what is the students learning. So what did they get from that instruction? What did they take away that we taught them? And what are areas maybe that they need a little bit help? Maybe they could use a little reteach lesson or things communicated in a different way. So summative assessments are a way for us to get some data so we can, talk about where the students are and look specifically at what their score is or what their results are, maybe compare some of those results to previous assessments that they've taken in that same content area or that same standard. Also looking across the class at what the data is, what is it telling us about the performance in that area, because again, that's valuable for us as a teacher to know if we need to reteach something or if, maybe we're ready to move on and maybe the students need an extension, maybe they need to be pushed forward in their learning. So summative assessments can happen usually at the end of whatever unit of instruction you have, things that are lessons that are sequentially building onto each other. And then it's like the culminating piece. In a school year, they tend to happen, a few times throughout the year, maybe like in the fall and in the spring. It depends on really like what the structure is for the curriculum that you're teaching, but typically there's more than one summative assessment, although you could look at it also as like a beginning of the year and end of the year type of assessment. So it's kind of open-ended, but the idea is that it's at the end of whatever your learning activity is. So those are the assessment forms when we're looking at formative versus summative. The other part is when we're looking at informal versus formal. So informal is very flexible, it's dynamic, so it's happening throughout the instruction at any period. One of the ways I tend to think of informal is really often when we're asking questions to the students and we're just kind of talking to them about it, where we're not actually keeping a record of every little thing they say, but we're just trying to check in with them. And it's just a chance for them to express their thinking and, not to be judged or evaluated, but just to kind of work through their thinking. We can also make it very individualized, and it's all about the process of whatever it is we're teaching. And the idea behind it is that we're measuring their progress. So it can additionally, besides being through a discussion or asking questions, it can just be that you're observing the students and what they're doing with their work. So the other piece is formal. So when we think of formal, I know the first thing that probably comes to everybody's mind is a test, right? Like a multiple choice typical test. But that's not the only type of formal assessment that there can be. So we know formal means that it's structured, it's static, it's standardized, and standardized is important. When we think about standardized, I don't mean like a standardized test at the end of the year, all the state tests, but that is a type. What I mean is that it has to be consistent with the types of questions and the amount of questions that we're giving, or the activity and the types of ways that the students are showing their learning. And the reason that it needs to be standardized is because if we're collecting data and we're looking at the students' performance across the different standards and different skills, and we're also comparing the students in the classroom, we need to have it be standardized so that when we evaluate it, we're on the same playing field. It will help us with that consistency so that it's a fair measurement. So some of the other ways that we will look at formal assessments are, we could have a project where the students are creating something. We could give them a performance task where there's actually steps of what they need to be doing. It doesn't have to be that typical multiple choice assessment. And the idea is that it's just something that you give them guidance and step-by-step instruction so they know what to do. And the other piece I talked about already is a student self-assessment. And this is a chance for the students to think about, where am I in this learning process? How am I performing? They can look specifically at their strengths, at the areas that they might need to work a little bit more on, and just thinking about what their confidence is in the area that you're teaching. So when they are completing a self-assessment, it really needs to connect with the goals and the criteria of what it was that they were supposed to do. So it's really helpful if you give them that criteria. A lot of teachers will make rubrics or a checklist, maybe give them some pointers of things to talk about if they're having a small little conference type of debrief with the teacher where they're answering some different prompts. On the bottom, you can see there's some different types of cards and things students can fill out with emojis. Since we're talking about young students, they love the emojis or happy faces, and being able to circle or color them in and gauge, where they feel they are. You'll also notice that the language is positive, kid-friendly language. So, they don't feel bad if they aren't doing what they want to be doing, or they don't feel good about what they're doing. It's okay. It's all right to say, I'm thinking still, or I'm getting there. And that aligns with that whole growth mindset mentality that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to be still figuring things out. So that's important. When we look at other examples, I have some images here. You can find a lot of examples on Pinterest. If you just kind of Google self-assessment, you tend to see a lot of tools where they look like a table, or they'll have visuals where the kids can rate, their performance. And again, it's really important that they're in kid-friendly language, or that they have those visuals so that the kids can easily do this, because that's the whole point, is that it's on them. And if you have students who maybe have a hard time, they're not quite at the level to be reading these or filling it out on their own, you could easily be filling it out for them while they're talking to you and you're asking them questions. Again, that's why the smiley faces tend to be used a lot, because they can color those in, or they can circle them or draw on them. But you can see how on the left, it's just like a rating system where, again, they're just talking about where they feel, if they're, where they should be, if they need a little bit more practice. The one on the right is a little bit more specific, where they're looking at reading and the accuracy that they were using while they were reading, the rate that they read the story, their expression and their voice while they were reading, and then stopping at the different punctuation marks and following them, like, if there's an exclamation point, changing the expression, or a question mark, raising the sound of your voice to ask a question. So that sort of thing. It's really important to have the criteria spelled out. So the one on the left is good for like young students, and you would want to gear it towards something specific that you're teaching. But the one on the right is a better example of actually aligning it with whatever the scoring rubric would be, because the student could use the same checklist that you're using to evaluate them. And when you think about CalTPA, especially when you get to cycle 2, CalTPA cycle 2 is all about assessment, and you'll have to develop different types of assessment. And one of the types is a self-assessment. So this is a great example of if you were doing a reading activity and these were the areas that your lessons were focused on and the students were building and understanding throughout each of your lessons, then this is the type of self-evaluation that you would give them. And so you don't have to create it all from scratch. You can pull from other examples and get some ideas. You can modify it. So maybe you're not working on all of these different areas. Maybe you just work on, 2 of them or 3 of them. That's the beauty of it, is that you can change it and tailor it to your group of students and the lesson you're teaching. So these are just helpful to think about as you're getting the kids to get used to taking ownership of their learning and being actively involved in the process, that it's not just you, this teacher, who issues all the grades, but that they should be a part of that, and that they should be excited about their learning, and they should be able to tell you where they feel they are. This was another one. If you participated in the Google Slides presentation I did last week, we looked specifically at Pear Deck and how Pear Deck can be used for interactive presentations. So this was just one of the templates that they have. If you were having a presentation where you're talking to them and they're all following along on their device, they can actually use the digital whiteboard tool to circle where they feel they are. And in real time, it will show you their responses. And then that way you have a sense of kind of where they are in the lesson. If maybe you want to do a little bit more review, maybe you want to stop where you are, maybe you feel like they've been overwhelmed. And so again, this is just an example of how assessment can take place at any point in the lesson. It's not just at the end of the lesson. And this self-assessment was really important too, because this is showing us where the students feel. And we need to gauge where they feel too as we're teaching, so that we don't just lose them and we're just off in la la land, or they're off in la la land while we're teaching. So the other important part of assessment is that, we don't just give them this activity or this test or something, and then they never see it again. What's more meaningful is that they actually get feedback. And we know that with young students, and especially if we're working in an online setting, they expect instant feedback. They really want to know how they're doing. And, I think it's pretty fair. I think we are the same way, where when you submit something and you work really hard on it, you want to know if you did it right or what you could do to make it better. And so that's very valuable. So these are just some principles of feedback. Now, first of all, there's just different ways you can give feedback. So feedback could be that you're verbally explaining something to the kids. Maybe, you talk to them a little bit through something, and maybe you ask some questions. Feedback is actually interesting in the sense that it doesn't have to be where you're directly telling them an answer. So if you use like an inquiry-based model of teaching, You might be asking a lot of questions and probing them to think a little bit further about something and to kind of guide them towards the answer. But you also could give them some pointers. You could have them talk to their peers, and with their peers, they could give each other some feedback. So it doesn't always have to be that the teacher is giving the feedback. I know in my classroom, we had an author's chair, and in author's chair that we would pick specific people to come up and to share their work. And they were very familiar with giving each other some compliments and some suggestions. We would do the same thing in math. It was a little bit of a different format, but for math, I would pick students' work to showcase in our closing. So I would strategically pick students' work that I thought was a high-level example, an on-level example, and an example of something that's kind of moving towards the right direction, but not quite there. I wouldn't tell them who was which level, but I would just pick them and I would have them come up, and that would help to build their confidence, because then you don't have the same kids coming up every single time. And when they would come up, they would just share their strategy, and I would have the other students weigh in on how many of them used the same kind of strategy, what was efficient about that strategy, what could maybe make it a little bit more efficient. And again, that was just me prompting them to give one another feedback. And that would help them to recognize that maybe one strategy was a little bit more efficient. So for example, let's say they were solving a multiplication problem, and maybe I had some students using drawings to make images of repeated addition, basically. So that might be like a lower level example. Maybe I have a student who is doing the actual algorithm for the multiplication. And then maybe I have a student who solved it in more than one way, and they checked it by doing the opposite. They did some division to make sure it made sense. I don't know. So hypothetically speaking, I could have each of those students come up and share their work, and then we could talk a little bit about their strategies. I haven't really had to do any of the work as far as giving the feedback, but I did strategically weigh into that, and now the kids are giving each other feedback. So that's really valuable. It can happen, you can do that with any subject area where the kids come up and the kids share. You can also have them exchange like journals with one another where they write comments. The beauty of Google is today now they can add electronic comments to one another on documents that they create. They can collaborate through things. You can collaborate, you can see their comments to one another, you can add a comment as well. So it's really powerful, the fact that we can add all these comments and share and annotate. The kids can then self-evaluate and decide where they are and what their next steps are. So those are just ways that we can give feedback. We can also, because we're talking about technology, we can also record our voice giving them some feedback instead of typing some of the feedback. We can highlight things and say, hey, I want you to take a look at this piece again. So there's just a lot of interesting and unique ways that we can give them some guidance. And it's very open-ended to what works for you and what you find works for your students. So looking at this little list on the right, we want to make sure that there's ongoing dialogue so that the kids are engaged in the feedback process. Again, they're the learners, right? So they should be taking ownership, they should be excited about what they're learning, and they should play a role. The next piece, feedback, is for learning. Obviously, if we don't give them feedback, how are they going to grow and how are they going to understand whether or not they have mastered the material or they need a little practice? Maybe they have a misconception with something. So this is a chance for them to be open to some of those things and to reflect on where they are and to think about ways to improve. And then, you can go through it again where they give them another practice question or activity, and they can then see and compare where they were from before to now, and if they have, moved on and made an improvement. We also have to be very careful as teachers that we are clear in our communication and that we're positive. I've mentioned before in other sessions of PD and other things I've done with other student teachers, I really like the Oreo method, where you start with something positive, and then the center of the Oreo is maybe a question for them to think about, or maybe just a comment about something that they might want to work on. And then you end with something positive. That way, they realize that it's overall, it's really good that they've made an effort, that they've worked on it, that they've done whatever it was well, and that, you know, it's normal that there's something that we're always all continuing to work on, and that's okay. But it's a format that's, you know, makes them feel like they're still showing progress and that they're not being criticized and that they're supported. So we want to be clear. Again, also when we say being clear to students, we want to make sure that when we're giving the feedback, it is telling them what they need to work on. So if we just say great job, for example, that doesn't really say what they did well. If we say, well, try again, what are they trying again? So we need to be very clear about, you know, wow, the way you solved this problem, I like that you showed more than one way. And technically the way I just said, I like, we really don't want to say I like, we can say the way you showed more than one way is an excellent example of how when you're looking at a problem, there could be two different styles or directions that you can take. And it helps me to see your thinking because there's more than one way. And then you might say something about this one part over here. I'm not really sure that that aligns with what we were doing earlier. Remember earlier we were blah, blah, blah. So what's the way that you might be able to try that strategy and show me? Again, just making it very clear what it is that we're communicating to them so they know what they should work on. Number 4 is a big piece I already have touched upon, that they really want timely feedback and that we need to be giving them feedback throughout all aspects of instruction. And especially if we're talking about distance learning, they really value that feedback. They're not with you all the time. So it's important that you can give them feedback on things as they submit them. Usually a rule of thumb is, you know, within 24 to 48 hours, you at least respond to them. You might not have, you know, all of their work finished, but you just let them know, I received your work and I'm working on it. That way they understand that you are actually, you know, looking for them to submit their work and that you value the fact that they did it, and then you're going to actually acknowledge that they did it. Being consistent is important. So we want to follow the same types of models that we use with all the different assessments we give, with all the activities. We want to make sure if we say we're going to give them feedback within a certain amount of time frame, that we are always doing that. Otherwise, you know, then they just start to lose interest if we're not giving them feedback or if we're inconsistent. And then the last one says feedback quality is maintained. That's just making sure that we're actually giving them the appropriate feedback, and we're very methodical with the types of feedback, and we just have good feedback. It's not like we're just saying, like I said, a pat on the back, great job. And this is something that we want to make sure aligns with whatever our goals are and the curriculum. So now we're diving a little deeper into the tech piece. Assessing in online spaces. So when we are working with young children online, we know that they get overwhelmed if we have too many synchronous meetings. They can't sit still that long. I mean, it's the same when you're in person too, where we know they need to be actively moving and have times to stretch and have times to talk and collaborate. It's the same thing online. It's almost even more of an issue because we are entering their homes. They are trying to share devices with other family members. Their family members might be working from home right now. And it's very hard. So when you're in a synchronous format, some of my other PDs have touched upon the fact that you need to be highly engaging. You might use like a Nearpod or a Pear Deck presentation so that you can ask a lot of questions throughout the unit, and the students can actually be typing in on the whiteboard or writing responses so that they're not just sitting there. That's another piece of that assessment, is that when you are working with them and they're far away, you don't really know what they're taking in unless you're asking questions and doing something to keep them engaged. So it's really important that you build in something in your presentation. If you're using tools in Zoom, you might give them a poll and stop and have that poll. You might open up the whiteboard and let them draw on the screen and have them take turns. You might stop and say, okay, I'm going to have each of you take a turn to get on the microphone and to express your thinking. Or you might open up the breakout rooms and have the students break up into smaller groups and talk to one another and come back together with you. Now, it's kind of tricky to do that piece because you have to have at least another teacher to join each of your breakout sessions with kids. So I don't know if you would have parents volunteering, and maybe parents could help you and you could have multiple rooms open, or maybe you just do that when you have a really small group of students and you have like at least one other adult on the call. But that's an option too, where you could have them talking to one another. If you can't use breakouts, you could have them come back at different times. So you could have small groups, kind of like you would in the classroom, that meet you at different times, depending on when it's their day or their the book that you're working on. It's the day that you work on that book with them and they come with their book. Same idea online. You have a specific time where you meet with them, and that way you can make it a little more interactive and ask a lot of questions. So synchronous is mostly where you're going to ask questions either in the form of asking them verbally or posting different poll questions or an activity where they have to draw on the whiteboard. You could even, for synchronous, be talking them through an activity, like let's say they're working on a Google Slides presentation or a Google Doc of some sort, and they're able to add things and you're able to comment, and maybe you're just on the call together because you're there for support. So that's one way to think about it when you're in the synchronous format and you're online, is that it's a little tricky. So again, you want to make sure that they're actively participating and that you're making it really easy for them to follow along. Now, asynchronous is actually more common in an online space because you can assign things and the students can complete them at their own pace. So you can use a Google Classroom and you can have activities that they have to complete after you've talked about something in your synchronous session. Some teachers are using Google Classroom. Other teachers are using platforms like ClassDojo because they were already using ClassDojo for behavior management, and you can share resources through ClassDojo. You can upload files. So you could actually give them an activity where you describe the directions with your voice, record your voice or a video of yourself, tell them what they should do. So maybe for little kids, you're having them work on the different alphabet letters. And today is the letter B. So your directions are that they're going to go around their house and take pictures of things that start with the letter B. And then they're going to upload some of those pictures. So you could give them like a little scavenger hunt. That's an assessment right there. You're testing to see if they understand what starts with the letter B and if they can apply that skill in their home, in their environment. Then they would upload those pictures. So some teachers are using Dojo. You could have the kids write down something and take a picture of it and upload it through Dojo, or maybe they record a video of themselves talking. The other option is, if you're not using Dojo, you can use platforms like SeeSaw, and we'll talk a little bit more about how SeeSaw can do that, FlipGrid and Padlet. So those are really good tools for asynchronous learning because the kids can go at their own pace. You could technically do them synchronously, but what would happen is they would be either on their own device, they would be looking at their activity while you're looking at your own screen, and maybe you're looking at their work on your screen, or maybe you're projecting on your screen what they're doing. So that's where it becomes interesting, is that when you're synchronous, there's different screens to look at, and if they're really little kids, they might have a difficult time navigating between two screens. Or if they're on a mobile device, it's really a lot more difficult to close out an app and go into another app as a young student. I mean, it's even difficult for adults. So that's something that you have to keep in mind when you're synchronous, that you might just want to be briefly meeting with them to go over the directions and to walk them through the assessment or the activity that they're doing, and just to be there to answer questions. And then they are going through the actual activities on whatever platform you're using, whether it's Dojo, Google Classroom, SeeSaw, Padlet, FlipGrid. There's a ton of them. There's other ones that some schools pay for. Like I know I heard of one called Schoology that some of the schools are using. And I know we use Canvas in our program, and there are schools that use Canvas. Blackboard, which several universities use. So whatever it is where the work gets distributed and submitted would be where you would be sending them to do the assessment. So it tends to be a lot of asynchronous. And again, that's because when you're in an online space, you want to be able to go at your own pace. That's the beauty of the online space, is that you don't have to be live in real time in one classroom like you would in traditional school. So we can assign activities, we can give deadlines for when those activities should be submitted, and those activities will be a way for us to see if the students understand. When you're sharing what they should be doing for those activities, or the actual teaching is happening, again, that can be in synchronous, or it could be where you record a screencast of yourself walking through some practice problems and giving them some visuals to look at, and then sending them that video, and sending them with that video some other videos or some other resources that they can look at. So that's why it's really important that there's one space that they can have all of this stuff that they can access. And then when they go to complete the assessment, they're able to showcase their learning because they had all that material and that support to get them there. So that's synchronous versus asynchronous. Some just overall considerations for assessing, especially online, are number one, your assessment should align with the learning goal. And not only the learning goal, but it should align with whatever the instruction was. So the learning goal is the heart of your lesson, right? Whatever it is, your standard or your objective of what you're trying to have the students do. And if you say you're having the students learn how to convert decimals to fractions to the 10th place, then your lesson should give them activities where they practice that. You should ask questions to get them familiar with that. And then when you are assessing them, guess what? It should align where they are now looking at converting those decimals to fractions. So that's important, because it's easy for us to sometimes add in other questions on an assessment that don't relate. And I think it happens more when you use an assessment that you did not create. And maybe when you taught the lesson, you only focused on specific things. So if you're pulling from your Pearson math textbook and you're looking at the test, this is why you might only want to pull certain questions for that test. And you might want to make your own assessment with some of those questions. But you don't want to use everything that they have if you didn't teach everything that they have. So that's important, that alignment. The next piece is that it should be meaningful. So just having the students do a multiple choice test, if it doesn't actually measure anything related to what you were teaching, is not meaningful. If you are teaching them to evaluate when they're reading a book and discuss like what the author's purpose is, then the activity should be something related where they are looking at the author's purpose and they're getting to weigh in on that. And it should be something that, it doesn't have to be where it's a book that you give them. It could be something that they've picked out, but they're learning that skill and they're demonstrating that skill. So that's why it should be meaningful, where they get to kind of have a role and they can still, show you what they're doing without it being in something that you only picked for them. Also, it should be something that's like real world, so that it's a skill that they'll actually use in real life. And so that, again, goes back to whatever your learning goal is. You want to think about ways that you can make it meaningful for your students. So one of my students, I thought it was really, really well done. She, for her Cal TPA Cycle 2, was having the students look at converting measurements. And they were looking at word problems. So they were having to take some conversions in the context of word problems. And she actually had them thinking about like when you're cooking. And so she put on a chef hat and she went in her kitchen and she was virtual with them. And so she was saying, well, I'm trying to cook these muffins and I don't know what to do because I have to make sure I have all the right ingredients, but there's some conversions involved. And so then the kids were like, are you really cooking? And they got all excited and they were asking her a lot of questions about it. And she was telling them, well, it's not going to be good if I don't do the conversions right, because the measurement actually matters with how much sugar I put into this or how much flour I put into this. It might taste horrible if I don't do the conversion right. So that's an example of just how you can make it meaningful, because now we're applying this math skill to something that is real, that we could really do in real life. And we're getting the kids involved with how that works. And then when, after she demonstrated and went through that with them, then she had them look at some sample problems that were within recipes. So that made it, more fun for them, and that still like gave them a purpose and still allowed her to see if they understood the material. Next piece is offering choices to promote ownership and creativity. So we want to make sure that, we can tell the kids, like, you don't all have to do the same project. Some of you might want to make an iMovie, and some of you might be more comfortable with Google Slides. Thinking about our Cal State Teach curriculum, that's what we try to offer and try to model at the end of each unit when you have a reflection, that it's open-ended. We've had student teachers make videos of themselves singing a song where they like sang the lyrics were everything that they learned in that module. And I had one student teacher who really loved Powtoon, and she started using it all the time to the point where almost every reflection had a Powtoon connected to it. She just loved it. So then I had to ask her, well, hey, have you thought about branching out a little bit? Because she just found that it was a really fun tool, but she got really comfortable with it. So we talked about other tools. But the idea is that, we don't all learn the same way, and we don't all have to show our learning the same way. And that's okay. And it's actually more fun for you as a teacher than to read like 50 essays that are all the same. It's more exciting to see the creativity of what your students come up with, and to give them that chance to really like think about what's a fun way. And a lot of times they put more work into it, and they do a lot more than you anticipate. And it's beautiful. And then they teach each other different skills. So that's important. And when you're giving an assessment, you can give them choices, and you can also just give them different assessments. I think a lot of teachers just have this like aha moment because they think every child has to have the same exact test. And I know I talked about consistency, but my point is that you might have a different number of questions for students, same type of questions, but maybe you give them a different number because you have a student who is just not quite there, and they just need a little bit more practice with a certain skill, and they don't need as many questions, or they just need the specific skill. Maybe you give them one of them some multiple choice questions, so they have a little bit of a selection to pull from, and maybe you give other kids open-ended questions so that it's a little bit more of a challenge for them. That's okay, you can do that, and that's really meaningful again to the students because it's aligned with their needs and their assets. And that's showing that you're really thinking about that. If you have English language learners and you're trying to assess them, then you might have an opportunity where you give them more, let's say it's for math, you give them more numbers and visuals instead of putting it all in like a word problem, because you're just trying to evaluate if they understand how to do the math skills right now. You're not looking at if they can read the word problem. That will come later. But right now you're just looking at, can they multiply? Do they know whether or not they should multiply here and how to multiply? So you can give them more visuals. You can make words bolded. You can make the font size larger. Let's say you have children who just have a hard time reading the font. So you can make it bigger. I've actually had students who, it's interesting, they could read it better on a different contrast of color. So I would print it on different paper I think it was like a bright green color was really helpful for one student. So it was fascinating. So we would print it on the green color paper and, boldface certain words. And I had a lot of students on IEP, so I had to think of ways to accommodate them. And even if they're not on an IEP, they're just not all going to learn the same way. So your assessment can offer choice, and it can be somewhat different where you're giving them some different accommodations to make sure that they can still show their learning, but that you're supporting them. The other piece is giving them higher order thinking activities. So if I just give all multiple choice assessments all the time, then that's not going to encourage them to think creatively. If I allow them to come up with something, to build something, or if I ask them in a performance task, I give them a scenario that they have to solve. So they have to apply some of those skills that we've worked on in this scenario. That's higher order thinking. So it's not where they're just having to memorize something and tell me the name of a famous person in history. I know for many of us, we forgot a lot of those dates and names and things that we were supposed to remember because we weren't taught in a higher order way that was fun and engaging. And, it was just a low level recall thing. So we want to give students those types of activities. Just a fun example, in my last PD about Google Slides, we were looking at templates, and there's a template for a Facebook type of page where you could have the kids pretending that they were a different person, a historical figure, and tweeting to one another. And so that's an activity that you could have them do where they're looking up research and having to come up with the tweets. And, they have only a limited number of characters in a Twitter tweet. So they have to make sure that they really cover the most important facts and events in their tweets. So that's getting them to think a little bit more, right? So that's that higher order thinking piece. And then meeting their different modalities, which I touched upon the fact that they just don't all learn the same way, and we can give them different assessments in different formats. But the other piece is that we know that some of them might be more visual, or some of them might be better at listening to something auditorily or working with their hands. So when we are assessing them, we can give them those types of opportunities. And you're going to love, if you haven't seen SeeSaw before, SeeSaw really has that feature built into it where you can address the different modalities, because the kids can record their voice and they can move things around on the screen, and they can draw on the screen, and they can just type in narrative. So there's a lot of options for what they can do and how they want to do that. And then I've already really emphasized the importance of timely feedback. So we want to make sure that whatever it is that we're having them do, that we are still getting back to them, so that, whatever it is that they did on that activity, it's going to translate in the next activity and the next lesson and the next lesson. So we have to keep giving them feedback so that they can keep making progress. And sometimes that feedback is redirecting them to do a little bit more practice and, focus on an area that they're having difficulty in. And other times that's just like a feedback to give them affirmation that they're doing it right and that they need to keep building on that. So some examples of it in the online world of when we're assessing, we've talked a little bit about that synchronous versus asynchronous. So for synchronous, we're used to having paper and doing things on whiteboards. You can do the same thing where you have the kids take a picture of their paper. So maybe, they're just very comfortable with writing out the problems. That's okay. They can take a picture. They can hold a picture up and actually show their work in a video or just a still image. And they can also hold up whiteboards if you're in like a Zoom session and you're chatting, and they actually have something to write it up and hold it up. The other suggestion is you could have sheet protectors where they put a sheet of notebook paper in a sheet protector, and then they can write on it with a marker and hold that up. So that's one way. The other option is just having them chat in the chat box. So I was observing a lesson recently where the students were really engaged in chatting in the chat box. And sometimes that was easier for them than in the with the microphone. So that's another way you could still assess their learning and get them out of their comfort shell, by getting them to talk in the chat if they're not wanting to talk in the microphone. Having them annotate on the screen, so we can give them like a Google form to fill out, or we could actually give them like in Pear Deck or in Nearpod where they have a whiteboard and they can, write different answers. You can do it where we see their answers and we know who wrote what, or we can do it anonymously. So you're just trying to encourage participation and get a sense of what, the class, where they are with whatever it is you're assessing. Giving them those emojis or different symbols that they can use so they can show how they're feeling about something, where they are, and then creating a poll. So that's another one that we could try. Let's see, there's a quick question on turn around the feedback to correct mistakes before they, yes, it's just a comment. Yes, that's correct, because if we don't give them that feedback, then they will continue with those habits and it will become a big misconception that's hard to address later. Now let's look at asynchronous. So asynchronous, we're not there in real time with them, so they can do this at their own pace, but we still get it and we still have to give feedback. So for example, having them record their explanation. We'll talk about FlipGrid for that reason. FlipGrid's a great tool where they can make a video and talk about their thinking and walk you through something. Or they could do that with Class Dojo. I had a student teacher who was working in 5th grade and the kids were using Dojo, and the kids actually, she gave them a prompt after they read something that they had to respond to. And so they had to actually write it out first, and then they recorded themselves, and they had to, from what they wrote, they had to say like the top 3 points, and they were recording themselves. I remember, I'm not joking, I watched this little 5th grader record herself like 10 times because she was so excited and she wanted it to be perfect. And she was probably a type A student, kind of like myself, but she just wanted it to be so good. And she spent like a ton of time on it. And I think it was a definite sign that she was engaged and she was enjoying it. And then, she was learning through the process. And when she had her video, then the other kids could see the videos because the teacher was collecting them through Dojo, but then she was also posting things in their Google Classroom. They were using a lot of different tools, but that was not when they were online. That was actually in the classroom. So now, those kids could similarly do that in an online format because they're used to it. And that's something you could do as easily with them too. You could also just have them do an audio clip instead of a full-on video. So where they're just recording their voice. There's so many apps that do that for them now. You can just do that on the iPad and on an iPhone, like making a memo, but you can also do that, like explain everything. I know we allow you to use that as part of the program, and Explain Everything has that digital whiteboard where the kids can record their voice as they're solving a math problem. So they can be telling you about what they're doing and you can actually see them writing out on the whiteboard as they talk about it. To me, that's more powerful than if you gave them a paper pencil test and just collected it, because you don't know what their thinking was as they were doing it. You just see the answers, whether they're right or wrong, whether they show their strategies or not. So now it's a powerful tool for you because you can see it. And a lot of times it's a powerful tool for them because they have to reflect on it as they're doing it. Like I said, that little girl made her video, 10 times. That got her really thinking critically as she was making the video about what to include in her video. So it was a big learning moment for her. And then by the time everybody else saw it, they were learning. And it wasn't just, the teacher seeing it, but the other kids can see it and they can give feedback. So again, that's really powerful. Just having them, like I said, I guess I was kind of touching on the next one, the visible thinking routine. We're having them, show their thinking. The next one is a self-reflection. So like in a journal or an e-portfolio. In my Google Slides presentation, if you haven't seen it, there's a template for a journal. It looks like notebook paper, but it's just each slide. You can keep adding slides with notebook paper so the kids could have an e-journal, electronic journal. If you're using SeeSaw, it does that for you as well, where it's like a portfolio of all their work. And you can publish their work and share their work with other students in the community, and you can share it with their families. So those self-reflections become even more meaningful because there's an audience. So it's not like they're just writing just to write because you told them they have to write an essay, but now they're writing because they know their classmates are going to see it or their parents are going to see it. Maybe their principal is going to be the audience. You could even set up a blog where, you know, I mean, I would be careful about permissions and making it public, but you could have a class blog where the kids could write their reflections. I also really loved Edmodo as a tool. Edmodo is almost like a Twitter or Facebook type of page for kids. So they can hashtag and they can have different groups that they collaborate in, and they can use it as like a discussion space. It's made specifically for kids though. So it's only kids that are signed up on that network. And it's not free. So that's the thing, is the school has to pay for it, or the district, or I think as a teacher, you can have an account as well. But it was a really neat tool because they can use it for journaling and for collaborative activities where they have to reflect. The reflection is then part of that self-assessment. So all these tools kind of go hand in hand with the different forms of assessment and giving the kids, you know, that power to choose what they want to do and how they want to show their learning. Just asking questions, again, is important. So asking questions throughout the lesson, at the end of the lesson, which can be done, you know, maybe you give them a prompt that they have to answer on a Google Doc or a Google slide. Maybe you have them, again, go to FlipGrid and record the answer. So the questions can kind of go with the different formats. And then just having them engage in discussions. So that discussion piece is part of that collaboration. And it's really important in an online setting that you have some form of discussion, because if you don't, they're not getting that in the classroom, and you don't know what they're getting with their home situation. If they have a family member that they can talk to about their schoolwork, or if their family member is also working, it's really tricky. So you have to promote that collaboration by getting them to talk online. And so you have to set up a space. If you have a Google Classroom, you could just use the stream. If you have, you know, FlipGrid or Padlet, you can have an actual space where they can go in and post things. So you could have a weekly or a daily place where you have a prompt that they have to answer. Even in Google Slides, you can have them record an audio clip of themselves answering something. And then you can have each kid take their own slide to answer, or each kid can do their own presentation and share it. So these are just some ways to really think about that. We can be asking questions about whatever content we're teaching and make it really fun and engaging, but we're getting assessment data. So are there questions so far about that? Because the next thing we're going to get into is looking at SeeSaw after we talk about differentiating. So are there any questions? So I threw a lot of information at you. Practice my teacher wait time. Hopefully that means that you're just taking it in and you're not completely overwhelmed. So I love this comic here. I don't know if you've seen this before, but it's kind of making fun of, you know, survival of the fittest, Darwin, because the idea here is that there's this assessment that's being given, and they all are being told that they have to complete this assessment, right, the same way. So the assessment is that they have to climb the tree. And what's powerful about this message is that we know that we don't all learn the same way. So we don't know how this was taught, right? We don't know what was modeled for them or demonstrated. We don't know what kind of practice they've had. Oh, there goes my cat again, sorry. And then on top of that, we know they all have different skills and abilities. So they are not necessarily all going to be able to get up the tree the same way, or are they going to get up the tree at all? Look at the fish. Do you think the fish will get up the tree? The bird has a high chance of getting up the tree, right? The elephant might knock down the tree. And so what is this? What do you take away from this? Let's just hear from some of you. What are your thoughts on this, if you don't mind sharing? You can put it in the chat, or if you want to jump on the mic.
I've seen this before. I actually always like this one. And for me, the first thing you notice is it just can't be a one size fits all. It's just not possible. Our students are just as different as these many different species that are shown here. And so you really do have to take into accommodations. You need to learn your students to the best that you can, so that you can help them to become successful and achieve. So, but I've enjoyed this one. I've actually, like I said, I've seen it before, and I think kind of a fun clip. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing. One size does not fit all. That's like a perfect way to put it. Anybody else? I see some good things in the chat too about
Well,
inclusion.
and what I like about this, if I can speak for just a
Please.
second, one of the things that I really like about this too is our ability and our role as teachers to remind kids that just because they don't have one particular strength doesn't mean they don't have other strengths that can help them to achieve whatever their goals are, whether it's, you know, getting to a certain level in math or, you know, whatever it is that they hope, whatever kind of life goals a 9 or 10-year-old has. But I just think it's really important that they recognize that there's just not one set of skills that will make them successful.
I love that. And that makes it so much more positive too about what we can do to help them recognize their own skills and their strengths. Anyone else? There's some comments here about being flexible, knowing that they don't express themselves or their knowledge in the same way. They're not all equal. They need scaffolding and support.
I think also that sometimes not all students do well in the same kind of test. So some might be good at writing and will score very high, whereas others might be good at representing the same information through a skit or perhaps a Google slide presentation or something like that. So they don't all, feel comfortable learning or showing their knowledge in the same manner.
And neither do I. I'm sure you feel the same way, right?
Right. I mean, I come from an Asian culture where I was taught in a very rote learning environment, and I frankly didn't do well. But when I came here and, went back to school over here, it was a completely different experience. Part of it could be that, I was older. Part of it also has to do with how it was presented to me.
Mm-hmm. So your culture has a role in the way you respond to things, right?
Right.
Just the way you're made up, as it's showing here, the different species of animals,
right?
What you're comfortable with. There's so many factors. Anyone else?
This always reminds me of the state testing at the end of the years.
Well, I don't think we should go there, but yes. It's a very valid point. And I think
but even with that, if we look at some of the assessments that we have throughout just the curriculum, even the math curriculum that I'm using right now, we're expecting the students to know all the same things. They've been, and we hopefully as teachers, we teach them in a way that they will understand and can differentiate it when we're teaching them, but they all then are still taking the same product at the end.
Well, and it goes with that whole module 1 is one of my favorite modules because it's talking about this paradigm shift in education. And it's kind of funny because we've been talking about this shift for a really long time, but it hasn't shifted very much. So there's this idea that like we're just giving these kids knowledge and then they're just reciting it and moving on. And that's not at all how learning should be. And that's not how teaching should be. We know about the brain and how we process things. We know about just technology and how the technology can be used to differentiate, for example. And so we shouldn't be doing it the same way, but yet we are. And dare I say it, this whole pandemic situation is really forcing us to think creatively and think differently about school. And it's actually, I think, one of the only best products of this whole pandemic is that we're really having to explore new ways of teaching because, we probably could have been doing this all along, but people were stuck in that comfort zone. And then there were the standardized tests. That was the focus, right? I mean, obviously there'll probably still be a measure of standardized tests, but that doesn't mean like your teaching can't have different ways that you allow the students to show their learning outside of that standardized test. So I think there's a lot of really good points here. And this is what gets me excited about the technology tools, because you don't have to do it all. You don't have to sit there and make 5 different assessments. It will do it for you. The technology allows you to make copies of things. It allows you to collaborate and pull from things from other teachers. And then you can also distribute things to individual students or to groups of students. So if you're using Google Classroom, for example, you can have different classes within the classroom, just like you would have your small groups in the physical classroom. And you can distribute those things to them and give them extra resources and give them different questions. If you haven't made a Google form yet as an assessment, I really encourage you to try it because it's very user-friendly. It takes a few minutes to get familiar with the different types of questions that you can create and ask. But once you have one, you can copy and paste it, and you can change the number of questions or the type of questions, still have the same question, but change the format of it. And it takes just a few minutes to just modify one exam into like 4 different versions of it for your students. So it's something we really should think about, that, you know, we don't have to create it all from scratch. We don't have to follow what's in the textbook on page 12. We can actually pull from that, so you're not just kind of scrambling on your own to get all the curriculum, but then you can tailor it to your kids and what you're teaching them and what they need to know and what their strengths are, like we talked about. Oh, there's a good
For just a quick
Yes.
comment on using the Google Forms. On the past professional development meeting, we were taught quizzes. It's like the online tool, and it's very similar to Google Forms. I feel like that it's more interactive, and you're able to make the problems a little easier than in Google Forms. So I know.
Are you referring to quizzes like QI, ZIZ, CZIZ?
IZ, yes.
Yes, yes.
That
awesome.
uses a form of Google Forms, but I feel like it's more interactive, and you can create different types of problems in there that you can't do in Google Forms, but it acts in the same way where you can get into Google Classroom and everything. So
you are so right. And I had a PD about it this spring. I know some of you were in that one because I recognize some of the names. And we played with quizzes. And quizzes, what I like about it too, it's kind of like a Kahoot, but it's a little bit better than Kahoot in my opinion, because you can connect the standard to it. And then it has like a deeper level of assessment where you can analyze the results in different ways. And also you can copy and paste like from someone who already created a quiz, and then just quickly adapt the questions and change them. So
it's kind of a blend between the two.
It is, yes. And I would say it's pretty user-friendly too, if you're new to it. And then it also now integrates into Google Classroom, so you can just integrate it right there, and it doesn't have to be a separate space for them to go. And I did not, so this PD is about assessment, but I actually did not want to look at assessments like Kahoot and Google Forms and quizzes very much, because they tend to be more multiple choice format. And for this, I wanted to expand your thinking about other ways we can get kids to create things and to make products as a form of assessment, besides just giving them a multiple choice assessment. In my personal opinion, I think quizzes and Kahoots and those types of quizzes where you have multiple choice questions are great for informal assessment, to just kind of gauge prior knowledge or where the kids are. It's really engaging, it's really fun, but it's so easy for them to just literally be guessing. They get sometimes competitive, where they just want to have the right answer and they don't care about what they're doing, or they want to be the fastest. And so I do run into that concern, and I try to encourage student teachers to think about it as a way to check in with the kids, but then that there can be another activity where they have to really show their learning. So it's kind of like Bloom's taxonomy. You can ask a lot of low-level questions, or you can give them open-ended questions where they have to create it and they have to build it and they have to really show their learning. And that's why I wanted you to see SeeSaw, because to me, SeeSaw has that capability of getting you to kind of be more of a creator in the assessment world than to have choices to pull from. But there's nothing wrong with having those types of choices to pull from. And sometimes that's what your kids need, and that's appropriate. So it really just depends on what your goals are and what you're trying to do. But you know, they all can't, as this slide shows, you know, they don't all necessarily learn that same way, and that might be a lot of pressure on some kids. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a really good point to think about. Like, it's a great tool, but it depends on what you're doing.
Yes.
All right, so we are going to jump into these tools. We have a little less than an hour. So I want to do SeeSaw first, and to show you what it looks like from a student perspective and from a teacher perspective. So on this next slide, you're going to try logging into my class. Oops, I didn't mean to click that. So let me go back. That's my Padlet, which we'll look at next. On this slide. So you're going to go to SeeSaw, and you're going to choose I'm a student, and you're going to use this code to log and join in my class, which is called Tech PD. So you'll have to minimize or not make this Zoom conference full screen so that you can toggle to another tab.
Do we need to make an account, or?
You know, I think you can just create, can you log in with, it makes you log in with your, can you use your Cal State Teach account to make your account?
Are you wanting us to see us as
or
a
if
student?
you have another Google account, maybe, whatever's easier, but yes, you do want to make an account.
Do you want us to come in as a student, right?
This time I do, yes.
Okay, then you would just put in the code.
So let's see, I'm going to switch screens.
But don't you have to have an account though?
Oh, you do.
You need an email address, that's why. And as you're doing that, if you get in before the rest of us, you can kind of look around and see what your thoughts are about the format.
So if we went in and logged in, are we supposed to be like student?
Yes.
I guess I'm the only, how do you know?
So you're joining a class, I see.
Yeah.
I just chose to log in with Google and as a student, and then it doesn't make me create an account. I didn't have to start a password or anything. It just asked for the class code.
That's how I did it too. It's
then
easier.
I've just, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh yeah, that's so much easier. It makes you go through too many steps the other way.
And Shelby made a good point, because one thing is, a lot of times these kids and mentor teachers and families, everybody gets overwhelmed with all the different apps out there. So to look at, if your class already has Class Dojo, technically you can give them activities and things to do that without having to have a SeeSaw. But I like SeeSaw, and I'm going to show you some features that it has that Dojo does not have. Dojo was primarily made for like a behavior management type of tool, and then they've added features where you can share work and share files. It still will work if that's what your students are familiar with, and you can still give them activities and assess them. SeeSaw is just more portfolio based, where you can create assessments and activities for them, and there's a community of people who already have assessments, and you can pull from their assessments and modify them. So that's the feature about it that Dojo does not have. But obviously, if you were doing this with kids, you would only want to introduce them to like one tool at a time and give them ample practice with it. It might not be the best time to try it today or, you know, at this point in the school year with the distance learning and everything with frustrations. But at least you'll know what it's like. If you were starting in the fall with your own group of students, you could introduce it. Is there anyone who still needs this code displayed on my screen?
It's funny, I didn't need a code. I could see, I was in your PD.
Oh, you were already in my class, huh? I did have a few students already.
No, I wasn't in your class before, but somehow it jumped me right in. I had to create an account, and there it was.
Oh, that's funny.
I've been playing around with it.
Yeah, if you type that code in when you're just signing into your Google account, it just sends you straight to Kelly Tech PD.
Perfect.
I don't know how, but I did it.
Okay, so while you're getting set up, I kind of want to just do a little walkthrough of what's on the screen and what are the features on my side of it, the teacher side. And then we'll talk a little bit about the student side. So I'm going to minimize the chat. If you have a question, it will be helpful if you use your mic because I just have a lot on my screen here. So this is my part of my homepage. So I can go to the classes that I have. So this is the Tech PD class. And I have a lot of settings. I can create multiple classes, which is nice because if you did want to, you could have kids, like if you were departmentalized as a teacher and had more than one, you know, group of kids that you were assigned to, like if you switched with another teacher halfway through the day, which I used to do, you could have the different classes listed. You could also just have your students grouped. So you could call them a class, but it could be like your reading groups. So this is a way you could differentiate. If you click on scan, it usually allows you to scan. There's a QR code you can print out. So if you were doing this like with kindergartners in your classroom, they could use like whatever device to scan the code to join your class instead of having to like create an account and log in. So that's your class. I can click on, on my right side of my screen where it says students, this is where I got the code and it tells you that it gives you a new code every 7 days. So for safety feature. And then here's that part where it says, if you want students to scan a QR code or type a text code to sign in, you can change it. So it gives you a lot of little options here depending on what kind of devices the kids have.
I have a quick question. If it changes your code every 7 days, does that mean your students have to put in a new code every week?
No, I think that's just once if they haven't already joined your class. So that it's just not out there for anyone to join.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes more sense.
There were some people who were already in the class from a previous code I had. So if I go to edit students, it's showing me who's all in the class. So if there's somebody who shouldn't be there, I can actually go into them and I can manage things. I can make sure the right names are displayed. I still get that teacher format here. Okay, I can also click email students with instructions if they're just having a hard time getting connected. So it will tell them all these steps that we just did. And that way they can log in. I can email that to parents. So it just gives you an automatic generated one that you can copy and paste. You can click copy email, save it to your clipboard. Then the same thing, I can go to families. And if I want to turn on family access, I can make it where all the families get notified when I post something or when their child posts their work and it shares their work. So that's something I can turn on. It opens up into a new tab. So it shows me, can you see the new tab on my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So it shows me like each person's name, and then I can add the family member under each person's name. So if I have a child who has divorced parents, I can add multiple family members by their email or their phone number. And then that way they can actually be a part of it as well.
And do the family members only have access to that child's
Correct.
information? Okay.
And to things I post in the community. The other option is I can click on print invites, and I can print, which is amazing. It has all these languages. So I can print an invite, and let's say I wanted to print it in Chinese, and it will automatically generate something that I can print out and send home with the students. I have an English language learner. It's taking a few minutes to open. But you do get the idea that it creates a letter. The other option is I can share the link. So if I had a blog or a website, I could click on share an invite link, and I could put this direct link on my blog or on my website or in an email to a parent. So there's a few different formats. Let's see if that letter, here's the letter. So it tells you here, right here, it has the QR code. And then now it's in Chinese, telling them the directions for that child. And it looks like I did it for all the children. So I could print it for all the children, or I could just print it for a specific child, and I could adjust the language. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. So again, all my students are here, and I can click on individual students and I can see their posts. So I'm clicking on Alicia, and I'm looking at the assignment she submitted. So let's see, actually, it's just the assignments that a bunch of you have submitted. And I can decide if I want to approve them or send it back. So I'm just kind of looking here at some of you who are playing with some of the assessments. I can approve all, or I can decide how I want to do that. I'm going to go ahead and approve all just for the sake of time, so you can see what happens when it's approved. And I'm going to go to the class journal. Oh, there's another one. Okay, everything's been approved. So that's where I can see the different activities that have been submitted. I can go to the activities that are done and the activities that are posted. So these are all the activities I have posted that you can play with. Now I want to share that I did not create from scratch any of these. So that's the beauty of this. There's a community that has activities, and I'll show you how to go through that. So I can click on them. These are the activities. I can actually edit them if I want to change something. I can just get a direct link to the activity, and I can share that on my blog and connect you directly to the activity. So that's really helpful. This is allowing me to see all the things that I have posted right now.
I have a question.
I can see,
My question
Go
is,
ahead.
you know, with SeeSaw, in a lot of these apps that you were talking about, how about memory? I'm just wondering about if we put so much content.
Are
we gonna lose it? Are we gonna
errors with that?
Can we save it? Say like.
Go ahead.
I said, can we save it by any chance? Like the material that the students did?
So you can save it to your profile. I'll show you. Like I follow a lot of teachers on here, and I save their content. Okay. And they have a lot of content, so I haven't run into any issues with like running out of space. But I'm just using the free version, so that's a good question. The longer I use it, maybe they might monitor how much I can create, but I have not personally seen that be an issue yet. So you can assign things by specific dates. There's a calendar actually with how you assign things. So you can, I can click on review, and I can take a look at, so it's already showing me that I assigned it on this date. It's showing me how many people have done it, how many have not responded. So I can click down here, and I can see right now in real time who has already submitted this activity. It's showing all your names and your completed activities. It's kind of like you're holding up your whiteboards for me. I can see the responses on the screens. I do have to get a little close to my screen, but I can see them and I can approve them. It has verbal instructions. So if you've played with some of these activities, they all have the ability for you to record your voice while giving directions, which is great to support your students. If I was using someone else's, when I go to edit it, so if I were to click on edit activity, I can add a different direction. So do you see on my screen how it already shows you the recording? I can trash that recording and make it my own if I wanted to add more directions or just wanted it to be more personal for my students. I can also change the name of it. I can change the direction. So maybe I really like something about the activity that's already created, but I want to add something, or I want to just kind of customize it. This is where I can do that. I can add a picture, a drawing, a video, all these different forms of support. So I can share things from a Google Drive, a link. That's really helpful. And then I save it. If I go to my inbox, so I actually have an area here where I post my announcements to you, and where I can get notifications back about things. So like here, it's showing me notifications about how you've added some of the assessments you've completed. I can send announcements to the families or just announcements to the students. So when I went to do this announcement, let's see what I did here. I went to my class, I believe is what I did. Oh, and this is the calendar view, by the way, too. If you had like specific days that you want assignments turned in, or you want to see when they were turned in. Let's see where I was. I think I was under my inbox to send my announcement. Copy text announcement. Oh, here it is. Sorry, I'm not paying attention. And it's in my bottom left corner. That's how I sent that announcement. So I can decide if I want to send it to all students, to all family members, or all students and family members. It doesn't seem to allow you to do like individual students. It's probably just a safety feature, but I can add, some follow-up feedback if I wanted them to take a look at something and give them a little bit more direction. So then one of the things I really like is it allows you to create skills. So I can cluster some of the activities by skills. So I click on plus skills, and I can actually add standards here. So this is where I can keep track of the different activities that the students are doing and how they connect to the standards that I'm evaluating. Then let's go back to the journal. So if I click on class journal, this is the private journal. Now I can see the students' work, and I could actually, whoops, clicked the wrong thing, sorry. I could click on Erin's journal of all the work. I can print a PDF of it if I want to, so I can still print it out or save it and do something with it. Has the date, it has a QR code so you can see it. So this would be kind of a fun thing if you had a bulletin board that you could actually have the QR codes to connect to SeeSaw with what you're doing electronically and post it in the classroom. So let's talk about how I get to these activities. I click on add, and I have the option of posting student work. So here's where I can share student work, assigning something, or sending an announcement. This is another way to send an announcement. So I'm going to go to post student work. This is where I can quickly give some directions and add something if I wanted to. Like this is what you could do too as a student if you're sharing something you've been working on. But I'm going to go to assign an activity. So when you go to assign an activity, you are automatically in your own library. And your library might be empty until you create things or you save things from other people's libraries in their community. So if I wanted to create something from scratch, I would click here, create new activity, give my activity a name, put my own instructions. I could add the verbal instructions, which is always recommended to go with the written instructions because that's supportive for students. And then I can add an image or some other form of multimedia, right, that we saw, that same screen. And then I can save it. So then once it's created, I can assign it. I can click on assign, and I can assign it to specific students, or I can have different folders, which I don't have any folders. I can do it by skills. So I had made an adding and a reading skill. So that's just different ways I can organize them. I could also, my folders could be like by subject. But what if I don't really want to make something? I can go to the community. So in the community, it gives me things by grade level, or I can go by subject. There's also just a little list down here of things that are trending. So you can specifically just look, let's say you're wanting to find something for math and you're wanting to find it for 3rd grade. You can pinpoint 3rd grade math and look for things. And as you find things that look interesting, you click the little heart and it will save them to your library, which you'll then be able to copy and edit them if you like them. You also, if you want to search within 3rd grade math activities, let's say you're looking specifically for fractions, then you can do a search and it will filter all the things that are already out there for fractions. So you can kind of go through them and decide what looks interesting and save them. So I'm going to save several of those, and then I'm going to go back to my library, and now they're all here. When I click on one of them, so I actually clicked on, let's see, did I click the right area? I click on assign, and I can just automatically assign that to my students. I could schedule it for a specific day or assign it immediately. I could add the time if I wanted it to be released at a certain time. But if I click on the actual activity, I can look at it and I can decide if I want to edit it. So these little, if you look in the bottom right of my screen, this is where I can click add to collection or copy and edit if I want to still save the original but make some tweaks to support a certain student. Or I can just create my own activity like this. So I could just use this as an example and copy and edit it, and then I could change some things. It didn't have voice instructions, so I could add that. I could put a different picture here. If I don't really like this picture, I can change it and do something different. So I'm gonna just say I like it and go back and then save. And now I'm creating something that's personal for my students, and I can assign it. The other cool thing about the community, you can actually follow specific people. So I shared in my PowerPoint or my Google Slides presentation, I follow Coach Ben. Coach Ben, he is amazing. He is a kindergarten teacher who has a high population of English language learners. And he was previously a tech coach. So he is doing so much with technology with his kindergartners. He has a lot of PDs. If you look here on his lesson or on his activities, he actually has links to the Google Slides that go with his lessons. And he has a website with all his resources. So I put him in the slides, and you can follow him, all his activities. They say the names on the bottom, so this is a different person, but these are Coach Ben. I can go to his page. If I just want to follow all the different things he has, I can look at all the things that relate to kindergarten that I want to save for my class. So that is what it looks like from my end. Now I can go to, I'm going to go back to the class, and I'm going to go to one of the activities. If I wanted to look at it as a student, I can click add response, and I'm just going to click on sample student. And now I can see what it's like as a student. So this is what you've been playing with. You can practice where you actually type things, or you can record your voice and allow it to record. I'm going to close that off. You can upload a picture. So you could have a picture of yourself holding up a piece of paper or an object or whatever it is that the directions have you doing. There's shapes and backgrounds that you can change. Here's where you can add a little caption. And then there's the hand is where you can move things around on the screen, and then the pens and pencils you can draw and erase. So you can see how this is very interactive, and this is also really supporting students who have different learning modalities because it gives them a lot of choice. I can click on to view the instructions. It will show me the directions that are written. It will show me where I can play the directions. So that allows me to listen to it again. I can create another page if I wanted to over here. So the students could make multiple entries here. And then let's say I'm happy with it. I can click that I just want it to be a draft, or I can click that I'm ready to turn it in, which is what several of you have done. And then now it shows up, and look, I can like it. I can add a comment. I can verbally add my comment. So this is that feedback piece. I can take it and I can add some private notes. So if I wanted to make some assessment data of what I'm noticing with certain students, I can connect it back to the skills. So I can connect it to reading, and I can give that student some evaluation out of the stars. And then I can save it to a specific folder. So, wow, look at all those cool things. And it's like, doesn't even take you that long to go through those activities. This is another one that I thought was really fun because it allows you to drag and drop things on the screen. So if I wanted to, I could click it and I could edit where it's located. I could edit the item on here, the people it's shared with. If I wanted to add more images for the kids, or maybe I liked this, but the pictures don't really match the book that I read. So I can change it and I can save it and add different pictures. So what are your thoughts about SeeSaw?
If I may speak, I think it's really good. I like the visual of it, but I'm wondering, is this more catered towards like the younger grades?
It does tend to be used a lot with younger grades.
Okay.
And if you go to the community, there's really not as many examples in the upper grades. It's very user-friendly for lower grades. Doesn't mean you couldn't though.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. Is where it was gauged, because it seems like if you try this with like third and up, it may not get the same read, or people,
and it really depends on what you're
attached to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it has it goes up to 12th grade, but I don't see the older kids using it. There are some things here, like this one is connected to a brain pop. You know, it's really open-ended with the content you can put in here. So let's say, you know, you could put something more challenging in here, and you could still have, you know, your students having to read through something high level and use it.
I kind of feel like this is the elementary version of Google Classroom almost.
Yeah, and some schools do that, where they kind of make that division, where the lower grades use SeeSaw and the upper grades use Google Classroom. It's very user-friendly, so I think it works well in that sense with younger students, but it does have a different layout and a different format, so it's just another option that you can use. You know, maybe you use it only for a specific subject area with students. Again, it's very open-ended with what you can do, because you can see some people are using it in more engaging ways than other. If you look at the examples, like some of people are just using it like a worksheet, like a glorified worksheet online, and other people are like having more higher order thinking activities. So again, it's just another platform, another format of a way that we can create activities and assessments. But you're right, it could be, you know, it is more visually friendly for young children, and I do see it used a lot in the primary grades.
I had two things that I wanted to share. One is that I had seen in a professional development I did a while ago that when you post reading material on SeeSaw, it can actually read it aloud to you, and so that is an asset for somebody who's very young and cannot read for comprehension purposes. Absolutely. Or somebody that has limitations in reading in some ways. And then the second thing I also noticed about SeeSaw is that not only the classroom teacher, but other teachers like the art teacher, the music teacher can post assignments in their own categories. So right now my son is in 5th grade and his music teacher posts these videos that she has made, and she wants students to follow the music and the beat and then upload their video. So that works really well on this platform.
That's great. That's really nice. And then they are in one common community with the students.
Right.
And your comment about them being able to listen to it being read to them is great for an English language learner. And it's also great for someone who's visually impaired. So
Yes.
those are other just accommodations that would support students besides, having them do that if they just can't read the text yet, at a lower grade level. So yeah, it's a really powerful tool.
And I believe, again, like you had shown earlier, I think it is done in different languages also. So it can translate for the student and read it in their language.
Which is amazing. You don't have to do that as the teacher, and you don't have to pull up a third-party application to do that.
Right. So there's some feature in there. I don't have the teacher version of it, but I believe there is some such thing.
There are. And what's nice about that is that I don't think Google Classroom does all of that. There's some things that this does that Google Classroom doesn't do. Of course, they don't all do the same thing.
So for my son's 5th grade classroom, they use the Google Classroom, and then they use something called Clever, which is like basically a tool that pulls in all these apps into it. So they have one login, and then they have all these apps inside it, and then they can play around with the assignments on different apps.
That's very smart. That's a great way to do it. And then you can just introduce them like a little at a time so that the kids have a chance to get comfortable with them. And then, imagine in the middle of the school year, once you've introduced all of them, then they can pick and choose if they want to use a different one for whatever activity you're having them do.
Correct. Yes.
Which is in line with that whole giving them differentiation and giving them choices.
Coming off what she was talking about Clever, because I did my intern or my observation with 4th graders, and that's what they were using, Clever and iReady. And what I like about those programs was it gave the teacher an opportunity to see where they're at. Mm-hmm. It really lets you kind of pretty much allow the teachers to engage and figure out what are their needs. You could change their level of how hard the problems are too in the program.
Which is incredible. And then it's just showing you that you don't have to do everything as the teacher because the tech helps you. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So I hope you can play with it more as a teacher too and get a sense of what it's like to see the teacher side of it and to play with making assignments and following different people to modify them. But just because of time going by quickly, we are going to move into the FlipGrid part of the presentation. We're not going to have as much time to go in depth with FlipGrid and Padlet, but we will just talk about ways that they can be used. And they are both part of our Cal State Teach curriculum. So you will, if you haven't already used them, you will be using them more in the program. So the idea is to think about how they could be similarly another form of assessment tool. On my next slide is a bunch of resources, including Coach Ben, who we were looking at his SeeSaw activities. He's been publishing things for remote learning. And there was a really cute one I was watching the other day where he was outside with his own children doing a science experiment. And he had some activities for the kids where he had the video that they watched him start the experiment. And then he was having them do something like that in their own homes. So he was making it very engaging and interactive, but yet he was still teaching and getting them excited and then using SeeSaw to assess their learning. So check out some of those. So FlipGrid, switching gears, FlipGrid is almost like a virtual whiteboard, or I guess you could call it like a bulletin board where you can post resources and materials, but the students have the opportunity to create videos and respond verbally. and they can use it for having discussions back and forth in asynchronous time, and they can use it for answering a question, even if they're in the classroom and you wanted them to go back and after they finish something like reading a passage or something they take away from their reading, they could go and record a video, and it's just a way that they can share their learning without having to write it. So it just gives them a different format. If they're more of a verbal person, sometimes teachers could have them write it and verbally state it, and it's just a way for them to express themselves, and then they can collaborate and share with other classmates and give each other feedback. So there's a lot of formats for how you might use FlipGrid. I'm going to show you an example from one of my student teachers. She was recently working on her Cal TPA Cycle 2, and she was having the kids work on math problems. And she's the one I was telling you about, where she was talking about cooking and having the kids convert measurements so that they could help her make a meal. And so she gave them some specific vocabulary, and they did some practice problems. And then after they did the practice problems, this was like a form of self-evaluation or self-assessment for them. And it was a chance for her to informally see how they were solving their problems. So this was her prompt that she gave the kids. And this is important because they need guidance of what they're doing. They're not just open-ended creating a video. You need to give them some specific criteria of what you're looking for and how you're grading them. So she says that they're going to try on the new math vocabulary by reflecting on their math work in a video, and they're going to be explaining what problem that they're discussing. So they get to pick whichever of the problems, and they're going to talk about how they solved the problem with their steps for problem solving, and then any questions that they had. And then what I love is her follow-up. Her follow-up is after they have created their videos, they're going to watch the videos of their classmates, and they're going to respond to 3 of them. In their responses, there's also specific points that they're going to discuss. So they're going to explain the ways that their approaches were similar or different. So kind of like I was talking about, where I used to have my students up in front of the room describing their problem solving strategies. This time they are answering each other's FlipGrid with another video, and then they're adding compliments or questions that they have. And she tells them at the bottom to remember to use their math conversation manners and consider the rubric that's on their altitude card for the day. So they had a rubric to reference. It gives them the FlipGrid code and its hyperlink so that they know exactly where to go, and this is what she shared with them. And then I just want to show you what did it look like. She made a little clip for me. She made this screencast, and the students are blurred, but you can kind of hear them. This is some of their flips, their videos from the FlipGrid. Oops, I didn't want to play. Can you hear it?
I need to find out how much lemon juice
Yes.
he needed for all the lemonade he needed to make. So for the problem that I did 10 gallons in 5 cups. First one right there, underline it. And it also said for every gallon of lemonade, there's 4 ounces of lemon juice. So, and I realized that there's 5 cups, I converted it into 40 ounces, and then I realized that's 4 groups of 10 ounces.
So I just want to pause it here. This kid's having to really be reflective and think about the steps that were used to be able to explain it while making this video. So that's really powerful. And then the teacher is able to hear the thinking and the problem solving. So that's just another big benefit.
Or 10 ounces of 4 groups.
Let's skip ahead.
One could follow your thinking. I noticed
This is where the teacher is now giving feedback to the student verbally.
that you first converted what Mr. Mazzata had into the same unit of measure as what Mr. Mazzata needed, which is a very efficient strategy when you're doing measurement conversion word problems. So nice work there. I appreciate that you told us you noticed that 40 was a multiple of 4, or that it was divisible by 4, and that is how you were able to quickly conclude.
So very specific feedback aligned with what the activity was, what the student should have been doing, and what the explanation was that the student provided. I'm just imagining if I was a kid in this class, how powerful it would be to see my teacher in a video telling me this, especially if I'm in distance learning, because it's just meaningful to hear from the teacher, to get that direct feedback instead of just, you know, a red pen on paper like what we traditionally have been used to. Then she has some clips here later in the video of the other students responding. So I'll just play a sample.
Hey Alex, so I didn't do the same number setup you. I didn't get the same answer, but I didn't understand what you did. And yeah. So, yeah.
So obviously this student needs to be a little bit more specific in their feedback to the other student, but it's just an example of how they did have to listen to each other's original video and to respond to it. And you know, she has a few others here that you can listen to in my presentation, but it was just a great job of getting the kids involved with listening to each other, providing feedback, and being able to assess their problem solving skills. So I did create a FlipGrid. Let's see where it is here. That's my Padlet. My FlipGrid, to join my FlipGrid, I'm going to go to share this with you. So I can copy it, and then I'm going to put it in the chat so you can at least take a look at what it's like. See if I can find the chat because I have my screen closed, sorry. And I see some comments too in the chat about how other ways other people have been using FlipGrid, which is great. Dressing up like the Renaissance. That sounds so much fun. It sounds like something very engaging that the kids would enjoy. Using a FlipGrid for a science experiment.
We log in as, what was it? Google?
That's usually the easiest. If you haven't ever used FlipGrid, to just create an account with your Google account. And so when I go to my FlipGrid, I've just kind of, you can create different topics, and I can make it active or I can close it. I can record a response. I can add other guests to make topics. There's a lot of little fun options here. So you'll have to look around some of the resources that you can play with on here. But I'm going to just click on this online assessments one here. So I have active participation in online spaces. How can FlipGrid be used as an assessment tool in online settings? So if you were to click on the plus sign, it would create the recording where I can answer it. So it just automatically pops up. I can add little emojis and stickers and record myself talking.
If I may say, Cassandra, your screen, we are not able to see your screen.
Oh, thanks for letting me know. Let's see.
Thank you.
Maybe because it opened in another, does that?
Yeah, that's good now. Thank you.
Okay. So it opened up in this tab. And all I had to do is click on the little plus and it will automatically start to make my video. So this I could share with you and have you upload videos. You can go to the different topics I have. So I had another one here about microscopes, if I was teaching about microscopes. So what, in this example one, I actually connected to News ELA and I had an article about microscopes. And then you can actually click on the immersive reader and it will read to you what the prompt is.
Share what you learned about microscopes today and give an example of how they might be used.
Okay, like we were talking about earlier. I can change it and make it a bigger sized font. If the colors, remember we talked about some people see better on different contrasts. So I can just look at the different preferences here for when I'm getting the directions. I can change to translate. If I want to hear it in Arabic or read it in Arabic, it should change it. Let's see, did it do that? By document. So I can change it by the word or change it by the document and get the directions, and then I can speak in my own language if I'm an English language learner and create my video. So then the class would have all the videos display that we can then go and respond to other people's videos. So I'm going to go back to my slides. These are a bunch of resources where you can you see my slides, or is it still on FlipGrid?
No, we're on your slide.
Okay, it did go back. Interesting. So these are some places that you might read a little bit more about some creative ways that people are using FlipGrid for education. There's some really creative ideas. We don't really have time to go into all of them, but as you can see, it aligns with the comments about making your assessment engaging, making it meaningful, giving students choices, giving them different formats to show they understand something, because you could use this in any subject area with any skill. Padlet is very similar. So Padlet, the difference with the Padlet is that it is like a digital whiteboard or bulletin board where I can add other content. And it's not as focused on the video piece, it's more about how I can add the comments. So I'm gonna go to my Padlet, and I created one called EdTech Content. And so if I wanted to share this with you, I could click on share. I can invite you, or I can just copy the link. So I'm going to copy the link in the chat so you can look at it. If I can find the chat. So I've already uploaded a bunch of resources here of ed tech content ideas for teaching online, but you could have had an activity where the students were learning about something in reading and having to find different resources to add to this. So when you go to the bottom right, you can click to add, and you can actually upload just by typing something, or you can hyperlink something. Go to a Google page or Google image right here. It automatically pops up on your screen. Is my screen displaying the right thing for you?
I believe so.
Okay, you see the Padlet?
Padlet, and you're on an enter search term.
Yay, thank you, yes. I can add my picture, so it'll go to my photo booth and ask you if you want to upload something. So this is all the different tools. So I can record my screen, I can record my voice. Again, it's just that idea that the students have different formats that they can use and that they can add resources. And then what's really nice is on the bottom of everything. So right now, only I've added things, but other people, you could add things and you can like things. You can comment on one another's activities. So it's almost like if you had a Pinterest board, but you had everybody able to add comments and like each other's thing, and you can use different formats. You can erase things and edit things. So you can do this for specific subject areas, specific topics. If you were working on, a specific project, there's so many options. And it's just a more engaging and interactive way than if I give you a multiple choice quiz to do, right? Because now you can show me ways that you've learned by, adding a recording of yourself, adding a resource that you found, taking a picture, making a doodle. So that's the idea behind Padlet. Again, I wish we had more time, but it's already after 9 o'clock. So we don't have as much time to dive into it, but you will get to do this in our curriculum, and you can play with it a little bit more. In the PowerPoint or the Google Slides, I also have some more resources specific to Padlet that you can use. Oh, looks like one of them's not hyperlinked, so I'll add the link to that using Padlet across the curriculum. But several of these are different websites that other teachers have shared with how they're using it. There's some PDF guides directly from Padlet and from some educational resources. So the last piece is that this is hyperlinked to the attendance form. And if you haven't already clicked on that, that attendance form is for today's session. Today's session is a 2-hour session. There's no follow-up activity. If you were in my last session, the Google Slides one, I'm actually still behind and going through all the Google Slides, and I was still going through Google Classroom. So I'm a little behind. I appreciate your patience. So this one does not have a follow-up, but hopefully you can play with these tools and use them with your students if you're in a classroom or a virtual classroom. To fill this out, you'll put your name, the term, your assigned faculty, and then I've already given you a drop down for the title of it, for my name, today's date. It's 2 hours. There's a drop down because it's just considered a PD. And then if you'll just give me some feedback, I'd love to know what you found most helpful about the session. This will generate a spreadsheet so that I can ensure that you get a certificate for completing the PD, and then you'll also get the 2 hours verified. And that will probably be about a week from now that I'm able to submit it, because like I said, I'm still trying to catch up on some of the other things people have been sharing. But thank you very much for joining. I hope that you took something away. And if you were planning to attend, I was having a session next Saturday about some literacy tools for technology. And I actually had to take it off the calendar because I ended up having several things added to my calendar for that week. And I'm going to reschedule it for June. So if you were hoping to come to that, it's not being canceled. It's just going to be postponed. I don't have a date yet, but please just check that shared PD calendar, and you'll see it up there as soon as I add the entry. So hopefully I'll see you again. And
are you talking about the next PD for you on Saturday?
Yes.
Okay.
So that one was going to be this Saturday the 30th. And I have several things happening that week, and it's going to be really challenging for me to get everything prepared. I'm trying to set up a virtual summer school for some of our student teachers. So we have several meetings and other activities I have to participate in. So I'm going to postpone it until things calm down a little bit in probably mid-June.
Do you want for assigned faculty, do you want our advisor?
Yes, your advisor, just so we can keep track and make sure your faculty knows that you're getting credit for this as well.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. So make sure you do that. And then I'll stick around for a few more minutes if you have other questions.
Thank you, Cassandra.
Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very much. Another great session full of good information.
Thank you.
Sorry, Cassandra, I had a question regarding the previous one. I know we had to do our Google Slides, but I couldn't remember